I'm Abby Alexander, and we're here at the Tucson Festival of Books interviewing Laurie Halse Anderson. So, what made you, start writing? Did you always want to be a writer, or is that, you wanted to be a writer later?
I just wanted to be on time for lunch. When I was a kid, that's really all I was, what do I have to do next? How can I avoid doing my homework? Why is my sister making my life terrible? I really didn't think about what am I going to be, not when I was little. And then when I was a teenager, life was pretty complicated at my house. So it was really just, trying to manage all of that. And then, I wound up after college kind of falling into a job as a journalist in a small local newspaper. And then when I had children of my own, I was writing all the time. And I'd always loved books. I'd always been a reader, reading constantly. And then I guess it was the journalism job that led to me going, oh, books, yeah. Because, I think everybody has a million ideas. I was probably intimidated by the thought of writing books. I wasn't a great student when I was little, and so I had this profound fear of making mistakes and didn't like having bad grades and things. So it took me a while to warm up to that idea.
I'm Misha Wilson, and do you hear a lot from fans? Do you get a lot of emails, fan mail, anything like that?
Direct messages, private. Oh yeah, it is. I fell into this job, right? I had some ideas. I figured out how to write, and for me, it's been okay. What's the next thing I have to do? What's the next thing I have to do? So I never had that long range plan. So when Speak was my first novel that was published, came out, and I've done 9 more since then. And then when people started to contact me, I was like, whoa, what is this? And it's outside of my family, probably the greatest blessing in my life to have the honor of corresponding with and talking to and listening to, most importantly, my readers. And they share their stories with me. And whenever you have the opportunity to kind of share your heart with another person, it makes both of you stronger. So I'm wicked strong now. Mm-hmm. It's so, it can be a little overwhelming because I hear from a lot of victims of sexual violence. Mm-hmm. I hear from a lot of people who've gone through and who are sometimes still going through very difficult, challenging things. So I take my role as auntie very seriously. So I always have resources that I can share with readers if they're struggling, if they need, because I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not their parent, but as an auntie, I'm a book auntie, my job is to maybe help them, take that next step in their own journey. Super fun, super fun.
So you said that you did journalism, but how did you, how would you have to go through to be able to actually publish books?
I had to learn how to write.
Yeah.
When I first started writing books for children, my own children were very small. So I thought, well, little kids are kind of dumb, right? So how hard can it be to write a book for them? Which is a very arrogant way and very ignorant way to enter the process. So I wrote a lot of children's picture book manuscripts, which were terrible. Horrible. And they got rejected. I have hundreds of rejection letters from those early years because I was the fool who didn't pay attention in English class, right? So the concept of the writing process and that we actually have to revise our work, that was a new concept for me. So I started below the bottom and made every single mistake. But I found that the process of having that idea, kind of that germ of the idea, and wanting to grow it was a challenge that I enjoyed. And I know how much I loved reading and how much I loved reading with my children, so I was motivated. So I had to learn what I ignored in high school. So I eventually got to the point where the manuscripts were good enough to submit. When you want to become published, your superhero who's going to help you is your librarian. because librarians will have access to the information that you need, because then you become a business person. It's like any artistic career where you have to have your own craft piece to do the creating, but then you want to develop a business sense. How do I reach out and get an editor? How do I get an agent? And librarians are always useful in those moments.
What was the hardest part to write of The Impossible Knife of Memory?
Yeah, that book comes very close to my own life. My father was a veteran from World War II, and he was 18 years old when he got to Germany at the end of the war, and was with the troops whose responsibility was to help the newly released people from concentration camps. So the things my father saw there scarred him for the rest of his life. He died at 86 and was still having nightmares. And like a lot of men in that generation, they self-medicated their post-traumatic stress disorder with alcohol. And his alcoholism was a big challenge for our family. I love my dad. My dad was the best, super awesome guy who was very scary when he was drunk. And we made our peace as a family. I had a great relationship with my father. But then my nephew came home from Afghanistan. And I saw my nephew and his buddies who got out at the same time doing the same things my dad did. And I realized that we're going to have another generation of children of veterans and children who have families where the parents are dealing with mental health issues. And when you're a teenager, sometimes we take on burdens that are a little too heavy for us, but we don't know it. And when you have a parent who's struggling and the teenager's trying to step up out of love, that there's a lot of situations there that are fraught. So I pulled heavily from my life for this book. I'm happy that my dad lived long enough to see it. We talked about it a lot as I was writing it. So it's pretty close to my heart.
What do you think, like, the hardest thing has been, like, starting to write?
Self-confidence. It doesn't matter how many books I've published. It doesn't matter that they've put stickers on some of my books and I have a couple medals in my house, or statues. They give you nice, cute statues, too. Because when I sit down to write the new book, I've never written that book before. And none of that stuff really applies. I've got to start all over again. But I have a very short attention span. That's my superpower. And I think that challenge that comes with the terror of having to do this again, that keeps me engaged and motivated. There have been a couple times I've gotten very close to walking away from the career because it's hard to make a living. We had 3 of our kids went to college at the same time. Those were some pretty expensive years. So I actually wrote to my college for my transcripts, thinking about going to graduate school or trying to get a job that has a paycheck and health insurance. And I always came to my senses. I think I was made to do this.
So you started off in journalism,
Mm-hmm.
and so was that when you began writing, or did you begin writing before that?
I began writing for fun in 2nd grade. And I also like wrote my own comics. And I was an architect for a while. I used to design spaceships. Like any kid, it's a child, your imagination, you feel like you have full reign to really explore. And then when my dad went through some really hard times when I was a teenager, and I turned to poetry again to, just because we couldn't talk about what he was going through in our family. I come from a very kind of conservative, shut down, emotional people, frozen white people from the North. So I turned to poetry as a way to explore all those very hard feelings that I was dealing with. But it never occurred to me that anybody else would want to read them, right? So I went to community college first. I'm a very proud community college graduate. And then I paid attention to school for the first time in my life. And then I went to Georgetown University where I studied linguistics. Don't do that. Don't study linguistics. It's actually super fun. It's really interesting, the way languages change and how languages are connected and what language does to our brains. Really nerdy. But it qualifies you for 0 jobs. So I got my education. My work experience up until that point had mostly been on farms. because I'm from the country. So I've lived and worked on pig farms. I've worked on dairy farms. So I always knew I could fall back on that. And really going into journalism, it wasn't that I wanted to be a newspaper reporter. It was that I had 2 little kids and I needed a job I could work at night. My husband had a job during the day, and he would come home from work. We would trade off the kids because we couldn't afford childcare, and I needed a job I could work at night. So when I was looking for this job, I actually had narrowed it down to 2 jobs. Number 1 was a newspaper reporter. Mm-hmm. Number 2 was pizza delivery. Now, I was younger and very pretty then, and I knew that I would get better tips as if I delivered pizza. You don't get tips when you're a newspaper reporter. My husband's a very sweet man, and he said, maybe, just maybe, there's more of a future in journalism than there is in pizza delivery. I was like, oh, all right. So that's how I started on this path. All right, I'm going to make a real fast answer, so you're going to squeeze in 2 more questions. Go.
All right. Is there something you wish you knew starting that you know now?
That's a great question. I think I wasted a lot of time pouting about having to revise my work. And if somebody had just sat me down and said, all right, girl, get over yourself. This is what all writers revise their work over and over again, then that would have been good. But clearly that was I don't have regrets because I think that there's a path that we all have to walk for a reason. And I had to learn that lesson. And even if somebody had told me that, I probably would have ignored them. So yeah, it worked out.
Besides like your family and close friends, who do you think helped you the most with writing your books?
You did. Both of you did. Hanging out with teenagers and I feel so honored when I talk to you guys and when I listen to you guys, because life is hard and our culture does not support you very well. Yeah, I couldn't write my books without hanging out with teenagers.
So, like, when you're writing, do you ever have, like, writer's block, and how do you, like, get out of that?
I can fix writer's block. I'll see if I can do it in 30 seconds or less. Writer's block comes from you're trying to be perfect in an early draft. Get over that. No one's perfect. Writer's block comes from you've been sitting down too long. The human body was designed to move, not to sit in a chair, so you need to take a walk or go for a run or go swimming. Move your body, play basketball. Writer's block also comes from stress. When you're under pressure, because you've been procrastinating, when you're under pressure, the way that our brains are wired, when the stress chemicals click in, adrenaline and cortisol, things like that, it makes it very hard to think creatively and to think clearly. You need focus and creativity. You need to be in kind of that zone, that sweet spot. So you want to write, when you have an assignment, you need to start writing it immediately, the night it's assigned, and you are going to write a terrible first draft that nobody's ever going to see. So the pressure's off, and then instead of having stress chemicals in your brain, you have these incredible feelings of confidence. And like, yeah, I did that. And then you get it, then you're motivated. Now you've got those positive chemicals in your brain, and the creativity flows, and the focus is laser sharp, and you're going to do a great job.
This is more of like further into the book, but do you think that Gracie and Topher were ever going to break up?
Oh, that's a great question. Did Gracie and Topher ever break up? Yeah. That's most relationships, like over the span of your life, most relationships come with expiration dates. Did you know that?
Yes.
And if you've ever smelled a carton of bad milk, when you're in a relationship and you're like, this isn't working out, just think about what bad milk smells like. And you'll realize if you've reached the expiration date of that relationship, usually you have. And that's okay. You move on to the next person. Our heart has many chambers, lots of room for new people in it.
That's fantastic.
Thank you very much, my friend. This is really super fun.